Hi everybody, welcome back. My name is Dr. Anthony Cliff, and on this channel we discuss everything from aviation to research techniques. So if that's something that you're interested in, particularly the research techniques, then please do like and subscribe. From everything on this channel discusses things from interview techniques to how to use NVivo to code your interviews and do thematic analysis, all the way through how to do quantitative research, SPSS, all those hints and tips, and also how to write really good research and set out your dissertations. We're going to have plenty more videos coming over the next year, something about supervisors and navigating your way through higher education. So if that's something you're really interested in, then please do check out. It should be along here at the top. Some of my research playlist videos, and do subscribe, click on that bell and you'll get some notifications of when I do post. So today's video is a follow-on from the previous video that I've done all about body language and picking up on that in an interview to make a good interview. And I mentioned towards the end there a thing called impression management. Now this is something that often isn't discussed and you won't particularly find a lot of papers on it, certainly not from a qualitative interview aspect. You'll find it more around job interviews and that kind of stuff. But it's something that's becoming a lot more mainstream and something that we're getting, certainly for me, when I'm teaching students how to become better researchers, I'd say from a qualitative standpoint, something that you really should consider about how impression management in an interview can either set your interview off from a bad start or can actually really bring out some great data from your participants because they feel comfortable. So that's really important. So what do I mean by impression management? Well, impression management comes down to a lot of individual things which all add up. So typically, how you dress, do you offer them a drink or do they offer you a drink? Do you take it? What about the location? Where is the location and what intrinsic power dynamics are at play in that particular location that you've got to be aware of? And as well, what about windows? What about doors? Where are you sitting in relation to the door? How can that affect your participants and how comfortable they are? Now, any good qualitative researcher knows that the aim of the game is to get your participants as comfortable as possible so they become as truthful as possible. If they're as truthful as possible, you're going to get some real rich and quality data from them. So, of course, you would have planned your interview, you planned all your questions, you made sure they're not biased or leading, you've done all that, and you've watched the previous video and you've picked up on body language and you know how to display yourself to be very open, but you're also picking up on their subconscious changes in behavior as well to alter your questions as you go along. Now, for impression management, we can help that process by making sure that we plan our interviews correctly and we understand that how we dress and where our location of that interview is has some intrinsic power behind it, and that can either make your participant comfortable or incredibly uncomfortable before you've even started to discuss your interview questions. So the first thing we'll touch on right now is location. Where is the location of your interview taking place? Now, this is the same for online as it is to face-to-face. So you've got to think about making your participant comfortable. So often when you try and get participants for an interview, you'll have an idea of where that interview is going to take place. And there's usually three options that you have. You go to them, and that could be their home, it could be their workplace. They come to you, it could be your office, your workplace, or the third option is a neutral venue, such as a cafe or a building that's not affiliated to either of you. And each one of them has intrinsic power to it. So let's touch on the first one then. If you asked your participant, where would you like to meet? And they say, oh, would you mind coming to my office? Or if it's an online interview, certainly during COVID times, they might elect to do this from their home environment. Now, from that standpoint, they have power here. Think of a football ground. The home team has the home advantage. They feel comfortable. It's their setting, it's their domain. You're entering that domain. So they have the power and they're almost conceding part of that power by inviting you in to that domain, but it's still their domain. They still feel the most comfortable there. Now, the aim of the game as well in interviews is to try and reduce this power dynamic. You want to be equals, and obviously, if you're equal, you're going to be more talkative. So, if they elect to do it at home or in their own office, that's often a space they feel most comfortable in. And I say most often here because sometimes you've got to be considerate about what your topic of your question is. So for the majority of your participants, if they elect to do it at home, be it online, or they elect to do it in an office setting, again, be it online or face to face, 9 times out of 10, that's because they feel most comfortable there. And you should go with that as well because that's where they feel comfortable. However, if you're discussing things around about home life, for example, and how, let's say, the lockdown has impacted people's perception and home life, well, then all you can see behind me is my rear wall. You don't know who's on the other side of that wall. You don't know who's in my house. So if your questions are situated around home life, well, then how comfortable is that power dynamic going to be? Because are they going to be really truthful if they've said, actually, it's been an absolute nightmare and I've hated living with the people I'm living with, when you know that they can hear them through that wall? So was it best, if you're going to talk about home, to do that in a neutral venue or somewhere where you're in control? Similar to an office setting, if you're talking about workplace practices, well, how truthful is that person going to be if they're in that workplace practice? Because they don't know who's listening in, are they going to be entirely truthful? So you've got to have a think about what your topics are and have a real reflexive think about that, about is that location the most suitable? Now, if they come to you, for example, and you offer to them to come to you, often I would say that's the third option that you should go with. Yes, it's great because you feel comfortable, but by you bringing them into yours, you have all the power there. You've invited them into your home or office. It's your space, and don't forget your participants are going to be nervous potentially because you're evaluating their life. You're probing into their lives, and they're having to make the effort to come to you. So often I would say, while it might be convenient for you, it might not be best for your data to have them travel to come to see you. If it's the case where a participant doesn't want to have it in their own space, and again, most often the reasons for that is transparency and they want to be honest, is that they'll offer to meet in a neutral location, such as a cafe, a library. I've done interviews in cafes and libraries before, and I've done one in a park before as well, where they felt comfortable where nobody can see us. So of course, that has issues in terms of picking up things around you on the microphone, but often if that's what it's going to take to get your person to be truthful, then you need to make that effort. And again, it's all about that power. Who gives, who takes, and how comfortable are they? So have a think about that. The location is really, really important of where you conduct your interview. In relation to that, if you are in a neutral venue, or you're going to them, or they're coming to you, if you have control of the room, make sure there's at least a window. Think about safeguarding. Make sure that obviously people know that you're safe and your participants are safe. And you should never position yourself between yourself and the door and your participants, because again, that's almost, if you watch the previous video about perceived threats and make them feel uncomfortable. If you're in between the way of themselves and the door, then by saying, yeah, you can leave at any time, but you're physically blocking that door in their eye view, then that's already making them feel slightly under threat. So try and position yourselves either away from the door or allow your participants to be directly towards that door. So if they should leave, that they don't have to go past you. So keep that in mind. Now, one of the interesting parts about impression management is all about how you dress. And how you dress actually has a real big impact on how your participant feels. So you might have come across this before in your research in terms of the insider and the outsider approach. Now, what I mean by this is sometimes it's nice to identify with your participants, that you understand what they're going through, that you are one of them. And if somebody is identifying themselves similarly to yourself, then you're probably going to be more open. And of course, it has pros and cons. That pros, you often get really good data, but the negatives to that is they often assume that you know some fundamental things about them because you've experienced the same things, and they might not necessarily talk about it in an interview. But in terms of insider and outsider approaches, how you dress often has a power dynamic to it. So often, because you're coming into somebody's life and you're looking at their life, that's what you're doing in an interview, you've got some power there because you're telling their story. You're coming into their lives and you've got intrinsic power there. You're coming into their lives and you're going to tell their story to a wider audience. So you have power as the researcher. Now, of course, we want to reduce that power, okay? We want to reduce the participant thinking, well, I'm going to say what I think they want me to say because they're a researcher and I want to put myself best foot forward um, because that's the story I want to be told. And you want to reduce that bias, you want to reduce that power. So when we talk about insider and outsider approaches, so for example, in my PhD, part of my giant PhD project, I was investigating using 3D models with students on fieldwork. And I wanted to evaluate this model with students. So I didn't want them to come in to my interview and be perceived that I was a higher power than them, that I was a researcher, that I was a potential academic coming in to discuss how they feel. I wanted them to identify with myself. I was, despite being a researcher, still a geography student. I'd gone through the same process they had. I'd done a geography degree, I'd done a master's, similar profiles to them. So if I turned up in a shirt and tie and a blazer, that's already given that power dynamic because that has connotations. You know, wearing a shirt and tie, having a blazer, it has connotations of being in power, it has connotations of being a lecturer. So I wanted to reduce that. So I dressed as I normally would when I was a student. And of course, in our interview, identifying with them, making sure they knew that I was a student and that particularly I was a geographer. We have very strong identities as geographers. And having that connection, again, instantly relaxes your participants and they're like, yeah, they understand, they know what we're going through, and they're going to be open with that. And that's all down to what I wore. Vice versa, when I've interviewed CEOs of corporations, I'm not going to turn up in shorts and t-shirts because for them, living in shirts and ties and blazers is what happens. That's what that environment is. That's what that population is all about. So I want to be at least equal on power by coming in, make sure they know I'm serious by wearing a shirt and tie and a blazer. If I turned up in shorts and t-shirt, it give off the wrong vibe. So really think about that when you're doing your interviews. How you dress, make sure it's appropriate for the person and the situation that you're in, which is really, really important because that really can affect how your interview is going to go. Finally, if you're lucky enough to, in the current climate, to have a face-to-face interview, then often, like I said, you're more likely to go to their particular chosen place, say be that home, be that their office. Now, you'll often find that subconsciously people will offer you a drink in their office. Now, this doesn't always be the case, but often people do this because they understand that you're making the effort to come to them. And so it's almost like a peace offering is, okay, well, I've made myself comfortable. It's my office. I'm inviting you in. You've made the effort. I want to concede a little bit of power by making sure that you're welcome by offering you tea, coffee, or water. Now, I find it's really important that even if you don't want it, that you accept it because that's already by you saying subconsciously to them, oh, thanks very much, I appreciate that. And, you know, it's that nice little icebreaker if you've never met them before as well. It's that give and take, and that's really, really important. And typically I find, like I say, if you go to their office or their home and they offer you a drink, take it. It's that nice breakdown of that barrier, that power dynamics, and that's what a really good interview is all about. It's reducing that power, it's getting your participants to be truthful. So I hope that's been helpful. I hope you really have a good think about where your interview takes place, be that online or offline. Your location, where you position yourself, and what you wear is incredibly important to the success of your interview. Okay, thanks for your time, guys.